Amen. So if you're new to this class, or even if you're not, we're going to talk about sex today. We've been talking about sex. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the physicality of sex as well today. If that's a topic that you don't want to hear for any reason, help yourself to another round of breakfast and hit somewhere else. We're not going to talk about sexual violence. I thought today might be the day that we would talk a little bit about sexual violence, but I just didn't have enough room to talk about it today. But what we are going to talk about are expressions of sex and sexuality outside of marriage. Next week, I'm calling it alternative expressions of sexuality. I want to talk about the peculiar state of celibacy. I want to talk also about some other what we would call non-traditional sexual relationships, covenanted or not. And we'll talk about those next week. But this week, I want to talk about sort of sex from the Bible, sex that is not in the covenant of marriage. So I'm thinking premarital sex, maybe a little bit of adultery, though we've already talked about that several times, so we're not going to talk a lot about that. We'll talk about masturbation today and some other things. So anyway, the things that we always talk about in church, not really. But sort of that comfort, that, oh my gosh, is he really talking about that feeling that I have and that I bet you have as well, at least to some extent, is a reminder that if we aren't talking about how we can be faithful as sexual beings created in God's image, then other people are having that conversation, and they're largely having it in ways that I find foreign to at least my identity, right? So the Christians who want to talk about sex aren't talking about it in ways that I find appealing or faithful. And also, those who are talking about, those who might have a different approach to sex often aren't talking about it as a theological framework, as an opportunity for stewardship. So our 5-week series, we're really looking at how can we use what God has given us, the gift of our sexual selves, in order to be faithful to God. And today we're going to talk about, in particular, some expressions of sex that are outside of marriage. Questions about where we've been, comments about where we've been or where we're headed before we dig into the text. Any reflections that you want to offer? As you think about the question you want to ask, I'll tell you, I feel like the church, the Episcopal Church, has talked a lot about human sexuality, by which they mean same-sex covenanted relationships, marriage or otherwise. I feel like we had a lot of conversation about that in order for us to have same-sex marriage in the church. We sort of talked a little bit about that at the time, but there's so much more to talk about it, and there's so much more for us to talk about that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about same-sex marriage, though it'll come up in today's conversation maybe obliquely. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Ray.
Could you refresh our recollection as to your teaching in the second session about how there's some change in sexual morality through the Bible, like through the Old Testament, and then from the Old Testament to the New Testament?
Primarily to say that what is normative changes over the years, right? And in the broadest sense, that the Old and New Testament reflect different and in some ways conflicting traditions as Judaism, Israelite worship, identity, evolved not only independently but also in relation to its neighbors. So some of the oldest stories and expressions of sexuality in the Bible make it clear that plural marriage was, if not normative, widely practiced. Similarly, prostitution seems to have been an accepted practice. Then as we move from ancient Israel to slightly less ancient Israel, 3rd century BC, and questions about sexual relationships in the Greco-Roman world are rising to the fore. Israel begins to define itself and distinguish itself as being separate from their neighbors, from the other cultures and traditions. And so monogamy becomes normative. Sex outside of the bonds of marriage for those who are married becomes an issue. That means the concept of adultery begins to change, when in the most ancient traditions it reflected a recognition that the issue at hand is the sexual identity and rights of a woman who is betrothed or married to a man, that man's claim on those that identity is not violated. To a broader understanding of marriage, we start to hear that men who are having sexual relations outside of marriage are also guilty of sin. As that moves from the 3rd century BC to around Jesus' time, that becomes stronger. We don't know exactly when, but by the time Jesus is walking the face of the earth, monogamy is the only accepted practice in Judaism, largely influenced by Greco-Roman culture. And then, of course, that changes further as we move from the time of Jesus to the time of the early church, as the church moves from a primarily Jewish identity to a mixed Jewish-Gentile identity to now a primarily Gentile identity, and as we've advanced through the century. So all of that to say, the Bible doesn't have one expression of sexual ethics. It's a diverse and at times conflicting understanding, an evolving understanding. Yeah. Other thoughts, reflections, or questions about that or anything we've talked about? Yeah, Mark.
Okay, so what I tried to disseminate with the information is that you talked about the culture, this, that, and the other, and we're looking at it through a Christian point of view. But say you're atheist, say whatever you believe in, another God, whatever. The mores of the time have to be defined historically for us to really understand this. So I'm confused a lot of times what might be, as you mentioned, cultural mores and ideas about sexuality and what's actually described in the Bible, because sometimes it seems like they overlap and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, sure. The only substantive response I would offer to your comment is the expectations of Scripture are often clear, but the reasons for them are often not, unless you know what was going on in the day, right? So one example we used is in the early church, Gentile converts to the way of Jesus were leaving a culture where sex outside of the bonds of marriage was widely accepted to a culture where only sex within the context of marriage is accepted. And so whenever Paul is writing to a community about sexual normalcy, he's often writing to Gentiles and to Gentile Jewish church communities that are trying to figure out, if I'm a Gentile and I become a Christian and I don't have to be circumcised and I don't have to eat kosher, why can I only have sex with one person for the rest of my life? And that's a lot of that teaching. So Paul's letters are clear about that. You don't need to know the context around it to understand what Paul's saying, but knowing the context helps us understand why Paul would say that, and therefore 2,000 years later, how we might apply current cultural settings to what we would call the same values of sexuality. Yeah. Other responses or questions? All right, so if you're coming in, don't forget, we're talking about sex. Don't be surprised that we're talking about sex. Let's look at the first text that we have, and the first two kind of go together. The first is what I've called Consumed by Passion, a reading from the first 5 verses of the 3rd chapter of Song of Solomon, a part that we haven't heard yet in this class. Who would read from the screen that? Jonathan, since you're right there, would you read? Thank you.
On my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases.
Thank you. All right, what do you notice? What's interesting in those verses? Yeah, Jeannie. If you're new to our class, don't forget that the microphone helps not only us hear you, but also those who are watching online hear you. Yes?
She is pursuing him.
She is, isn't she? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We talked about that in the first week, right? Often sexual identity is expressed from a male point of view. Still true in our culture, right? Men get uncomfortable when women talk about their sexuality, and yet Song of Solomon gives us a very different perspective, yeah, which makes the rabbis and sometimes the preachers uncomfortable. Yeah, what else? What else do you notice? What else do you notice? Yeah, Alex.
So to follow that up, that she's in pursuit, we spend most of the verse seeing that pursuit, but then at the end it seems to change like the aim or the objective, which is don't awaken love until it pleases. So almost kind of like, well, which is it? Like go after it, or wait.
Yeah, I think what she's saying is, look, once you give in, it's going to be hard to say no. Like once your heart knows what love feels like, you will spend your days searching for it. You will not be able to think of anything else. So young women, like if you're not ready for that, don't do it, because once you do it, you're not going back, right? It's such a wonderful thing, right? I think in some ways it's the same message, but it's sort of almost a tongue-in-cheek cautionary word. Yeah. What other comments? Yeah. Wait for that microphone so we can hear you.
I was sitting there reading that last line for a moment, trying to put it together as well. I kind of thought the same as you there for a moment, but I think perhaps that he pleased her, perhaps does not mean sexually, and that is what stirred up and awoke her love. So she is actually like admitting it, and it's, you know, sometimes hard to do in different ways, so it might seem like it could go either way, but in the end she's admitting to being pleased and giving into the love, as he mentioned, and it's stirred and awoken.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing that we've noted earlier is that in Song of Solomon, there's nothing in Song of Solomon that suggests that the woman whom we hear from today and her lover are married. In fact, at the beginning of this text, like, it could be that she's lost her husband. It could be, but it seems likely that they're separate, right? And if you read all of Song of Solomon, repeatedly he sneaks in when no one's looking and beckons her to come out where they can be alone together. So it's a highly passionate relationship, affair between two women who are, as far as we can tell, two people who are not married. And yet at the end, right, we see she can't let him go until she's able to bring him back to her mama's house, right, into the same bedroom where she was conceived. So language of fulfillment, almost sort of marital expression and marital fulfillment is bound up in this language that yet, a story that yet also isn't married. So we're kind of playing with, this is not a casual encounter. This is not a tryst. This is a committed partnership, it seems, and yet one that doesn't conform to the normal definitions, at least as we would expect the Bible to say about marriage. Yeah, Molly.
I have a question
Yeah.
about the last line. It says that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And my question is, pleases whom? Pleases the woman who's seeking her lover, or pleases God or a mom, a dad? Like that to me, is it you're waiting for permission, or is it like a physical awakening? You know.
Yeah, good question. I think you could interpret it in any of those directions. This is a line that gets repeated in Song of Solomon. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, I adjure you. And it's not always until it pleases. Sometimes language of until you are ready or until it is ready. So I think maybe we would say the woman speaking, also her partner, maybe their families, maybe the entire community, and maybe God. Yeah, maybe another way to put it would be until it is pleasing. Yeah, follow up?
Well, I guess for me, when it says until it pleases, if it's pleasing her, the speaker, then it's hedonistic. If it's pleasing to somebody who's giving her permission, I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it.
Yeah, I do think physical pleasure is important. I'm not sure I would say that it's hedonistic, but I would say that, yeah, there's absolutely. Yeah, sure, yeah. All right, let's read the next bit. It's from Deuteronomy. It kind of goes in the opposite direction on purpose. Who would read for us, please, from Deuteronomy 23, these verses? And I could have just pulled out a couple of them that are relevant, but I often think reading something like Deuteronomy is helpful in context, so we get to see some of the surrounding text, so we're able to see not just the one or two verses, but really what's on the mind of of the author or the community. What's really going on here? Who would read this from Deuteronomy 22 for us, pretty please? Over there? Yep. Thank you. Either Mark or Garrett, either of them.
Go to the default. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and then hates her and accuses her of misconduct and bridges a bad name upon her, saying, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find in her evidence of virginity. Then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders of the city in the gate. And the father of the young woman shall say to the elder, I gave my daughter to this man to marry, and he hates her. And behold, he has accused her of misconduct, saying, I did not find her in your daughter evidence of virginity. And yet this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloak before the elders of the city. Then the elders of that city shall take the man and whip him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and gold, shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife. He may not divorce her all his days. But if the thing is true, the evidence of virginity was found in any young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done an outrageous thing in Israel by whoring in her father's house. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. If there is a betrothed virgin, and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of the city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, because she did not cry for help, thought she was in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. But in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lays with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall become his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, so that he does not uncover his father's nakedness.
Thank you. Do y'all remember Will Gaffney? Will Gaffney was a Tippy speaker. One of the phrases that I really like in her preaching and in her writing is Iron Age theology. Like, she just sort of says that as if we all kind of know what that means. But, this is an Iron Age text, right? And so it's helpful for us to remember that although human nature hasn't changed, cultural norms and the expressions of those norms have changed. There's a lot in this text that is abominable. There's some in this text that is surprisingly egalitarian, perhaps. What do you notice? What do you notice? How does this text and the previous text, what's the conversation that they're having together? What's going on between this? How do we interpret this text? Yeah, Molly.
So I can't let go of the last line of the previous text where it says, if it pleases. So if it's from the perspective of the woman who's speaking and looking out for her lover, and it pleases her, then it's about her choice, her ownership, her empowerment. This actually speaks to the same, because if, essentially they're describing rape, so if the man rapes this woman in various situations, the clarity is about the punishment of the man and that the woman had no choice, so she is not to blame.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Yeah. What else? Ray, right behind you.
These texts seem to come from different worlds. This Iron Age text seems to be before people's individual consciousness or feelings or awareness are of any value. This is all external, whereas the Song of Solomon is all about internal feelings.
Oh, I sense there's care. I mean, I think the fact that we would assume something about, we would give the woman the benefit of the doubt if she is raped or is found in any kind of sexual encounter out in the open country. That we would give her the benefit of the doubt is significant. And although it's bizarre, I think, to us, the fact that the man loses his choice, whether it's that he can't, in the first case, he can't divorce the woman whom he's claimed was not a virgin, or at the end of the story, he can't divorce the woman whom he has raped. In both cases, seem to be perhaps about the concern of the woman. It's not the way we would express concern for a woman, but the fact that she doesn't get ostracized by the community because of what he has done to her is interesting. Now, it's not, again, we know all too well what happens when we allow men to decide what's in the best interest of women or others, right? And so here we see that repeatedly in the text, but at least it's conscious of it, perhaps, yeah. Other thoughts about the text? The Bible doesn't have any prohibitions of premarital sex. It's not in the Bible. Like, if you read the whole Bible, every word in it, never once does it say you can't have sex until you're married. It doesn't say that. Part of the reason it doesn't say that is because, as we heard earlier, normative sexual behavior has changed over the generations. By the time the New Testament is written, as far as we can tell, it is normative that sex only happens for married people. It is definitely restricted to the bounds of marriage, but nowhere does Paul or anybody else say, you can't have sex until you've tied the knot. That's not there. But we get texts like Deuteronomy, where it says, if a man claims that his wife wasn't a virgin when he married her, then she could be in big trouble, unless the parents can prove that she was a virgin. What's curious to me is that text isn't really about premarital sex, right? The text is about a man's willingness to dismiss or to get rid of a woman because he doesn't like her anymore. And a convenient excuse would be, hey, by the way, I know it's been 3 years, but 3 years ago on our wedding night, wasn't a virgin, get rid of her, please, right? The fact that the text wants to make sure that men who have all the authority and power in the legitimate structures of the day aren't able to use that in a way to ostracize women, that's what the text is about. And yet, it's not unfair for us to teach our children that the Bible says that sex belongs in a covenant of marriage. I think the Bible does teach that, even though it doesn't say that. And so we find ourselves having to wrestle with it, but I want us to wrestle with it faithfully. And I want us to name that the Bible also, as we read in Song of Solomon, acknowledges the beauty and the pleasure associated with the sexual union, even when it's outside of marriage. And yet we also recognize that somehow sexual behavior is not only about pleasure, it's also about community. It's also about relationship. It's also about honoring God. And these texts are hard to sort through. Thoughts about any of that? Thoughts about, Jeannie, Ray, whichever one you want to go to. Ray's closer.
Well, my concordance here has about 30 references saying fornication denounced. And so what is
fornication?
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, fornication is improper sex. I mean, and that's what it is. Like, it depends on what you say, right? So is sex with an underage person fornication? We would say yes, but not ancient Israel. Is forced intercourse with an unwilling woman fornication? We would say yes. The Bible would say, maybe not, right? So the title porneia, fornication, whether we're talking Old Testament or New Testament, it's Hebrew cognate. It means unlawful, unacceptable sex. which, it depends on the culture, right? And likewise for us, both as Episcopalians, but also as 21st century Americans, sexual norms are very different than they were for our great-grandparents, than they are today in other cultures and in other religions. And so the question is, that's exactly right, what is it? What is it? And some preachers would say sex outside of marriage is fornication. Well, you can make that argument, but you can't base it on Scripture. But you can maybe base that on cultural norms of what we've learned, what the Holy Spirit told you last night when you were dreaming. I don't know. Yeah, Jeannie.
This is maybe the best time for me to make a comment that, to me, addresses sexuality and its relationship to God. And I think, and it's kind of a hard thing to think about, that the ecstasy that's experienced in physical intimacy with another human is something that's parallel to the ecstasy God expects us to experience when we're in union with Him.
Yeah.
And so all of these all the rules and stuff, without ever saying it, is kind of like if you're chasing after other gods, it's like you're chasing after unchaste sex.
Yeah.
It's kind of a uncomfortable parallel as far as I'm concerned.
It
feels that way.
It's a strange parallel. Augustine, ancient doctor of the church, teacher of the church, said that in heaven, orgasm is a matter of the will. It's a will. It's a matter of the will. Much as you say, because of it is an expression of the union with God, right? He's also the one that says the Holy Spirit leaves the room whenever you're having sex, right? Which you think, like that's dumb. But, if you need to figure out a way to say that this holy thing, which is the procreation of children, is somehow tainted in a way that passes along this thing we call original sin, then you end up with sort of silly explanations. And you end up with preachers saying things like, fornication equals this, even though it sometimes doesn't. So I think it's a beautiful reminder that that the sexuality of our identity and of our relationship with others is an image of our relationship with God. It is a part of our relationship with God. That makes for a really strange marital sermon, right? A marriage sermon. But it's absolutely worth exploring and thinking about. Yeah. All right, I know we've got more to say, but we're going to keep going because otherwise we won't finish. And we still won't finish. But let's look at Ruth. Ruth 3, 1 through 15. Who would read this for us? Let me see if I can stop us short. Let's just read the first two paragraphs. Who would read the first two paragraphs of this Ruth? Thank you, Alex.
Okay. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I seek security for you so that things might go well for you? Now isn't Boaz, whose young women you were with, our relative? Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. You should bathe, put on some perfume, wear nice clothes, and then go down to the threshing floor. Don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he is lying. Then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Ruth replied to her, "I'll do everything you are telling me." One more paragraph?
Yep, one more.
So she went down to the threshing floor, and she did everything just as her mother-in-law had ordered. Boaz ate and drank, and he was in a good mood. He went over to lie down by the edge of the grain pile. Then she quietly approached, uncovered his legs, and lay down. During the middle of the night, the man shuddered and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. She replied, "I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread out your robe over your servant because you are a redeemer."
Thank you. You remember the story of Ruth, right? And this is Boaz, her kinsman, who's going to claim her as a spouse. And it's a happy ending. What's she doing? What's her mother-in-law tell her to do, right? You don't go lie down next to a man, having taken a shower and put on perfume, and lie down at his feet unless you're expecting somehow to convince him to cover you with his blanket, right? A euphemism for claiming you as his own, bringing you into his family. Feet are a euphemism for genitalia in the Bible. Not always. Sometimes feet are just feet. But there are different Hebrew words for feet. One of them is like the foot that you would put into a shoe. But the other is sort of a more general term for that general direction on the body. And like, for example, when the cherubim had 6 wings, they cover their faces, their mouths, and their feet. It probably means their genitals. They're probably covering their genitals, whatever that means for an angel. Isaiah also will talk about the hair of the feet. The hair of the feet doesn't mean hairy feet like hobbits. It means pubic hair, right? So feet are a way to say, we don't know that for sure, but there's something seductive happening here. And we didn't read it, but if you go on, they're like, look, nobody can see you here. You need to leave before anybody wakes up. But tomorrow when the sun is up, we'll make it right. There's somebody who stands closer to you in relation than I. We'll see if he wants to claim you. If not, then I would love to have you in my life. So there's something interesting happening here. And the mother-in-law, the one who's lost her son, this is the one whose sons had died, and Ruth is her widow-in-law. She's saying, look, I got a plan. I got a plan. What does that tell us about the way sex works in the Bible? Even if you read this without any sexual intimacy, just she lay down at his feet, and when his feet got cold, he bent down to pull the covers. He's like, oh, look, there's a woman in my bed. Even if that's the case, what's God up to here? What's this changing about the way we hear people being invited to use their sexual identities to accomplish God's will? A bold thing for the preacher to say. What do you hear? What do you notice? Yeah. Yeah, Garrett.
It strikes me that it leads to commitment.
Yeah. Isn't that funny how it goes that way? Yeah, and it's true in some ways in the Deuteronomy passage as well, right? If you have sex in a way that violates somebody else's commitment, there are serious consequences to that. And if you have sex with someone for whom there isn't a commitment, you're going to have to pony up. Is it Vanilla Sky? It's been a long time since I saw it, but when Penelope Cruz says to Tom Cruise, I think that's the Ruby, your body's writing checks, your heart can't cash or something like that, right? There's a demand of relation. There's an expectation of relationship here. Absolutely. Yeah. Other reflections on the text. Remember that in the evolution of sexual norms that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, at some point along the way, religious leaders in the Jewish tradition needed to combat a Greco-Roman culture that was purely hedonistic. They claimed monogamy and the importance of monogamy, the marital bond. But when they did so, they also stopped talking about the physical pleasure of sexual intercourse and only talked about it as a procreative gesture, right? The more ancient texts give us far more sort of beautiful and well-rounded expressions of sexuality. Once the religious leaders are primarily concerned with limiting sexual relationships, then we stop talking about sex as pleasurable, and we start talking about sex as procreative, right? And yet, within the marital relationship, there's a beautiful sense of sensuality and physical pleasure that we've read maybe in all our texts. Other thoughts about this? Other thoughts about Ruth? Yeah, Ray. All the way over here. Yep.
Echoing St. Augustine, you're touching on the world hatred strain in the New Testament.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You're in the world, but you're not of the world, right? I think it may, I'm not sure how I'm going to fold it back into the thesis of the class, but as Christians, I think the most profound teaching for us to receive is that Paul says, no, you don't have to be circumcised, a fundamental expression of belonging to the people of God, right? You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to keep kosher. Don't worship idols. Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. That's the Acts lesson. And refrain from porneia, from fornication. Somehow ritual gestures and expressions are not binding, but certain moral gestures, including how we think of ourselves sexually, matters. So for the one who eschewed any kind of eschewed circumcision as a necessary rite, would all say, but you've got to be sexually chaste. And that's really informative. I think that's really informative for us. And I think we can hold on to that and not be Puritans, if you will. All right, we're not going to read the whole thing, but who would read for us, please, the first paragraph of Genesis 38, Genesis 38. There should be a 3 here. Who would read for us, please, the first paragraph? Yep, thank you.
It happened at the time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again she conceived and bore a son, whom she named Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. She was in Chezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother." But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house.
Thank you. Do you remember the rest of the story? It's a great story. This is not the same Tamar as David's daughter, different Tamar. But Tamar tricks her father-in-law into having sex with her. She pretends to be a prostitute. She collects his signet, his sign. She gets pregnant. When the word gets out that his dead son's widow is pregnant, he wants her to be stoned to death, and she produces the signet because he wouldn't allow his son to do, his other son, his last son, to do the duty that he was supposed to do, which is to raise up children for Tamar so she wasn't a poor widow, so she could have a life, right? And Judah didn't want to lose his third son, so he said, stay in my house until you grow up. Till my other son grows up, then he'll take care of it. And she tricks him, and he repents of his evil. Anyway, what do you notice? That language about spilling semen on the ground, spilling seed on the ground, right? It's woven into Christian language about sex. It's used in conversations about birth control. It's used in conversations about masturbation. Is this text about masturbation? No. What's the text about? Not having babies, right? Yeah, cheating. Not fulfilling your obligation to care for other people, right? We don't usually talk about sex as something that is for a community, but I think next week we'll hear a little bit more about our sexual ethics are beyond the couple. It's about, and it's not just the family, it's about the community. How we identify one another and how we honor each other's sexuality is about the spiritual, physical, economic, relational health of the entire community. And that's a really weird way to talk about sex, but it's how we talk about sex. It's how our religion talks about sex. That's strange. We'll say a little bit more about that next week. I'm going to have to pull a lot of disparate threads together next week to make it work, but we'll get there. All right, so again, the Bible, and we're not going to read any passages about this, but the Bible has almost nothing to say about abortion. If anything, it's pro-choice, the Bible. That's not how religious people talk about abortion. Has nothing to say about masturbation, except for maybe this, but it's not really about this. So anyway, so what's that about? Unless you want to call porneia, fornication, you can throw a lot of things under that umbrella, and we have over the years. And maybe we would say it is a culturally evolving identity, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay for God's people to say, that wasn't allowed 50 years ago, but actually we can do that now. And maybe that's the point. The point is sexuality and our understanding of it is not locked in time. It has to evolve just as our culture evolves. All right, last one for today. Let's read Romans. So we're going to skip over Leviticus. I forgot you don't have a handout. We're going to skip over Leviticus. This is classic text about that people use to say that homosexual relationships are forbidden. It's a tough text. It is really clear right in verse 22 that men can't lie with men as if women. It's an abomination, right? That's a central text. Central text for those who would prohibit same-sex relationships. One of the challenges is it's a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot more to say about that, right? And even if you just allow your eyes to scan the surrounding text, you'll see that although it's really clear that that's the case, we're also really concerned about other expressions of sexuality that in this culture, in this time, undermine our ability to be who we are as God's own. Notice the beginning of the chapter. You shall not do what they do in Egypt. You shall not do what they do in Canaan, because we're different. And one of the ways in this time that was different is that men don't have sex with men. That was a part of the norm in that day. Contemporary religious figures, Christians and otherwise, who want to pretend that this text doesn't say that, are missing the opportunity to actually really wrestle with the text, because the text says that. We have to do better than ignore the text or pretend that it doesn't say what it says. I think there are really good and important ways to wrestle with that. We'll talk about that again a little bit more next week as we wrap everything up. Like, it's important for us to talk about sexuality and talk about it in a way that doesn't ignore the Bible, but wrestles with it faithfully. All right, let me read for us. Somebody can read it. That'll be the last word. Who would read from Romans chapter 1, this bit from Romans 1? Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
From heaven, God shows how angry he is with all the wicked and evil things that sinful people do to crush the truth. They know everything that can be known about God because God has shown it all to them. God's eternal power and character cannot be seen, but from the beginning of creation, God has shown what these are like by all he has made. That's why those people don't have any excuse. They know about God, but they don't honor him or even thank him. Their thoughts are useless, and their stupid minds are in the dark. They claim to be wise, but they are fools. They don't worship the glorious and eternal God. Instead, they worship idols that are made to look like humans who cannot live forever, and like birds, animals, and reptiles. So God let these people go their own way. They did what they wanted to do, and their filthy thoughts made them do shameful things with their bodies. They gave up the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped God's creation instead of God, who will be praised forever. Amen. God let them follow their own evil desires. Women no longer wanted to have sex in a natural way, and they did things with each other that were not natural. Men behaved in the same way. They stopped wanting to have sex with women and had strong desires for sex with other men. They did shameful things with each other, and what has happened to them is punishment for their foolish deeds. Since these people refused even to think about God, he let their useless minds rule over them. That's why they do all sorts of indecent things. They are evil, wicked, and greedy, as well as mean in every possible way. They want what others have, and they murder, argue, cheat, and are hard to get along with. They gossip, say cruel things about others, and hate God. They are proud, conceited, and boastful, always thinking up new ways to do evil. These people don't respect their parents. They are stupid, unreliable, and don't have any love or pity for others. They know God has said that anyone who acts this way deserves to die, but they keep on doing evil things, and they even encourage others to do them.
Thank you. Romans 1, another text of terror, another text that's been used to do a lot of harm in the wider community. I think it's worth just sort of hearing this and noting what Paul's really talking about, right? This isn't a text about homosexual relationships. It's a text about people who don't belong to God, people who are not Christians, people who are not Jewish, people who are idol worshipers, and the things that make them distinct from the people of faithfulness, right? Interestingly enough, there is no text in the Old Testament that prohibits lesbian relationships. It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Old Testament. This is the only one that does, as we see in Paul. Paul, as culture has changed over thousands of years, Paul now feels a need to express that aspect of human sexuality. Again, we got to unpack that. We got to wrestle with that. I think where we are left is it's really important to notice the connection between idol worship and this sort of sexual behavior, which is not to say that people who are in committed same-sex relationships are idol worshipers, but that Paul is able to associate people who don't know God, who are worshiping images, carved images. Paul associates that way of engaging the world with unnatural sexual relationships, what Paul would identify as such. I think it's fair to read this text. It is absolutely fair to read this text and say that same-sex relationships are outside the bounds of God. You could read that text and say it. But I think when you say that, you are saying something that I don't think Paul had in mind. Well, Paul probably would have agreed with that. I think Paul would have agreed with that. But Paul wouldn't have agreed with it as a way of defining the relationship of the community. Paul would be challenged by what we know about human sexuality, but I think Paul would be open to being challenged by that. I think we can wrestle with texts like this and talk about what is normative and beautiful in our sexual identity without relying just on the surface of the text. But we can't do that if we're not willing to actually read the surface of the text and engage it. It's tough, it's hard, but I think it's up to us to be thoughtful, prayerful, and faithful as we talk about that. Look at the broader expression of human sexuality in the Bible in order to ultimately wrestle with texts like this. All right, we're out of time. They are about to start church without me in 2.5 minutes. Next week, we'll look at other expressions of human sexuality, and I hope you'll be here. Thanks.